Good morning. Um, like I mentioned last night, I'm going to try to cover up this first chapter today with at least 2 to 3 videos. So we're going to begin with 1.3, how economists use theories and models to understand economic issues. Once you've gone through this section, you should be able to interpret a circular flow diagram. You should be able to explain the importance of economic theories and models, and you should also be able to describe goods and services markets, and as well as the labor market or labor markets. So let's first begin with talking about a person, an economist, one of the most famous and one of the greatest economists of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes, between circa 1883 and 1946. Now, he pointed out that economics is not just a subject area, but a way of thinking. He wrote, it's a very popular quote, in the introduction to a fellow economist's book. He had written, "Economics is a method rather than a doctrine." So it's more of a method than a doctrine, an apparatus of the mind, a technique of thinking which helps its possessor, the possessor of this thinking pattern. It helps that person to draw correct conclusions, solutions, etc. So, in short, what he meant was economics teaches us how to think rather than what to think. So, it's more an inner protected way of analyzing rather than an outer guided pattern. There are lots of questions we have. If we have the correct method and the correct, flow of thought and the ability to analyze, this particular part of economics being more of a doctrine, more of a method than a doctrine, and that economics actually helps us how to think rather than what to think. Okay, actually will help you understand economics more. So it's more of analysis that's required out here. Now, economists actually see the world through a different lens than anthropologists or biologists, classicists, or even practitioners of any other discipline like medicine or surgery. Okay, they actually analyze issues and problems using economic theories, okay, that are based on particular assumptions about human behavior. These assumptions actually tend to be different than the assumptions that an anthropologist or a psychologist might use. A theory is actually a simplified representation of how two or more variables interact with each other. The purpose of a theory is kind of to take a complex situation, a real world issue, or the like, and simplify it down to its essentials, basics, and essentials. If it's done well in a very scientific analytical method, this will actually enable the analyst to understand the issue and problems around it. Okay, a good theory is simple enough to understand, while it's very complex to capture the key features of the object or the situation that we are studying. Sometimes economists use the term model instead of theory. Strictly speaking, a theory is more abstract, okay? Is a more abstract representation, while a model is a more applied or kind of, you can call it an empirical representation. We usually use models to test theories, But for this method of learning that we're going through, we'll use terms interchangeably as and when required. For example, an architect who is planning a major office building will often build a physical model first, okay, that sits on a tabletop to show how the entire city block or the building will look like after the new building is constructed. It's more of a visual representation. It's a model of what finally the output will be. Companies often build models of their new products, which are more rough and unfinished than the final product that finally comes out, but can still demonstrate how the new product will work and how it will look. A good model to start in economics right now for us, since we're just entering into economics, is known as the flow diagram or the circular flow model. It actually pictures the economy as consisting of two groups, households and firms, and sometimes towards a more advanced method, which we'll do within a few minutes. There are households and firms, these are the two groups we study, and in the middle we keep the government. So these are the two markets that interact with each other, and how finally government also interacts with these two markets. There'll be a video, there'll first be a few pictorial representations, after which uh, there will be a video that I've downloaded from the internet for us. Okay. Now, in this, the goods and services market in which firms sell and households buy, okay, and the labor market in which households sell labor to business firms or other employees, okay, will also be studied. So here's the principal basic model or diagram that you have to understand. Okay, so let's talk about the circular flow diagram. The circular flow diagram shows how households and firms actually kind of interact in the goods and services market and in the labor market. The direction of the arrows actually shows that in the goods and services market, households receive goods and services and pay firms for them. In the labor market, it's the way around. The households provide labor and receive payments from firms through wages, salaries, benefits, etc. Firms, on the other hand, produce and sell goods and services to households in the market for goods and services, or the product market as such. Arrow A out here, towards the top, indicates this. Households pay for goods and services, which becomes the revenues to firms. Arrow B at the far end, which mentions payment for goods and services, indicates this part about firms receiving revenue for goods and services that they provide. Arrows A and B represent the two sides of the product market. Where do households obtain the income to buy goods and services would be a question. Now, these households, they provide the labor and other resources like land, capital, raw materials, etc., that firms need to produce goods and services in the market for inputs, which are also known as factors of production. So now that we know factors of production, this is a term which will be used quite often. Arrow C towards the end actually shows this part of labor being provided by households to firms. Okay. In return, these firms pay for the inputs or resources that they use in the form of wages and other factor payments. Arrow D, that is second from top, which mentions wages, salaries, and benefits, okay, actually shows and represents this. Now, arrow D indicates this very well, and arrows C and D together represent the two sides of the factor market. Okay. Now, in the real world, there are many different markets for goods and services and markets for many different types of labor. The circular flow diagram out here actually simplifies this whole thing to make the picture easier to understand and grasp. In this diagram, firms produce goods and services which they sell to households in return for revenues. The outer circle shows this and represents the two sides of the product market. For example, the market for goods and services, in which households demand and firms supply. Households sell their labor as workers to firms in return for wages, salaries, and other benefits. The inner circle, that is C and D, okay, this represents the two sides of the labor market in which households supply and firms demand. This version of the circular flow model is stripped down to the essentials, but it has enough features to explain how the product and labor markets work, in tandem with each other in the economy. We could easily add details to this basic model if we wanted to introduce more real world elements like financial markets, governments, and interactions with the rest of the globe, like imports and exports. Economists carry a set of theories in their heads, just like a carpenter carries around a toolkit. So when they see an economic issue or problem, they go through the theories they already know to see if they can find one that fits. Then they use the theory to derive insights about the issue or problem. Now, one thing to understand out here is economists express theories as diagrams, graphs, or even as mathematical equations. Don't worry, as we proceed further, we'll mostly use graphs. So that's later, nothing to worry right now, and they'll be explained as much as possible. Now, economists do not figure out the answer to the problem first and then draw the graph to illustrate. Rather, what they do is they use the graph of the theory to help them figure out the answer. Although at the introductory level here, you can sometimes figure out the right answer without applying a model. If you keep studying economics before much longer, you'll run into issues and problems that you will need to, you'll need to use graphs to solve. We explain both micro and macroeconomics in terms of theories and models. The most well-known theories are probably those of supply and demand, but you'll also learn a number of others as we progress. So we wait for the next part. Okay, now we'll try to break this further down. Okay, this was a very simple situation, a very simple model that we actually simplified the whole model into the basics. Now we'll go further down, break this up a little more in a little different manner, and see how it goes. Now, we already know that the circular flow diagram or the circular flow model is actually a graphical representation of the flows of goods and money between two distinct parts of the economy. And these two distinct parts would be market for goods and services, where households purchase goods and services from firms in exchange for money. And the second part being markets for factors of production like labor, capital, and other resources, where firms purchase factors of production from households in exchange of money. Okay, so we're going to go into the next part, okay, where we're going to break this up, this circular flow model or the circular flow diagram, and we're going to discuss on the market for goods and services. Now, the market for goods and services is actually the place where households spend their money buying goods and services produced by firms. So in other words, it is the place where firms sell their goods and services that they have produced, and they receive revenue paid by the households. Now, this market represents the place where money and goods are exchanged. In this case, the flow of money, that is the green arrow in the diagram, goes from households to firms in exchange for finished products which flow from firms to households, represented by the red arrow. So that should actually kind of explain more about the market for goods and services. Now that we've completed, the market for goods and services, it's time we talk about the market for factors of production. Right now, the market for factors of production is a place where households offer their labor, capital, and other factors such as land, etc., receiving thereby kind of receiving an income for their use. Firms use these factors in their production. In this case, money flows from firms to households, which is marked by the green arrow in the diagram, in the form of, they kind of, the flow of money comes from firms to households in the form of wages in exchange for labor, interest for capital, and rent for the use of land. Now, factors of production flow from households, which is actually the red arrow out here, to the firms so they can produce more goods and services. So this actually kind of sums up the case of markets for factors of production. So in the third part, what we're going to do now is we'll try to see how this looks like when we combine both the diagrams. We actually, when we kind of combine both the diagrams together, we find two common factors out here. One is firms, which merge with each other to form just one group called firms. The other is households, which merge, both sides from the markets for goods and services and the market for factors of production, they merge together to form one group called households. Now here we actually, in the green marker, in the green arrow, you'll see there's another common factor which is marked by this green arrow known as money. Now we're trying to differentiate how money flows, so that is not combined, okay, together to form one set. So anyway, the exchanges made in the economy imply a redistribution of rent according to the diagram and the creation of value that makes the economy grow. Out here, one thing that's worth mentioning is that usually diagrams do not show how the economy actually works. There are a few things that are not shown in this diagram that must be taken into account to really understand how the economy of a country works. For instance, take government intervention, things such as government spending in the form of unemployment benefits, as an example, or government income, example like taxes, are not shown in this diagram. However, this diagram introduces a clear view of how the economy works and how things work in tandem in the economy. The way of measuring all these flows of money is the gross domestic product. It can be estimated using one of three methods: looking at total expenditure, at total income, or using the production approach. Now this sums up everything that we've talked about out here about the circular flow diagram, but I'll have a video after this to explain it much better and to show you the complexity that this diagram can produce on a very basic scale. Excuse me. Another thing that you need to note here is we've used some terms like goods, production, growth, government intervention, government spending, unemployment, taxes, gross domestic product. Now I'll have separate videos on those, okay, explaining these out here if you want to go in for them as a reference, okay. And all you got to do is just search for those videos. They'll be termed, or they'll be named as, separately as goods, production, or maybe growth, government intervention, government spending, unemployment, taxes, gross domestic product, or GDP. And you can find out more, you can learn more. These would be outer references that you'd be going in for. So that would be a good learning graph, and you might be able to get some knowledge in advance before we do something else after this. So after all this big talk about circular diagrams and circular flow models and all, I feel we are all quite confident on if anyone asks us about a circular flow model or a circular flow diagram, I'm sure most of us would be quite confident to talk about it or explain on it. But I was just going through the internet searching for further resources which would make this more interactive and interesting for you people. And I found one video that I felt I should include out here. I think it's available on YouTube also. But please do go through this video. Okay, it's a very small one, a very short one, but it should be more informative. And definitely, it does explain this whole circular flow model, in a more interactive way, bits and pieces taken in a more analytical method. And it includes not just the household or the firm, but also the government, and how the government interacts with these two sides, or these two groups. And it also, after the whole thing is over, it also explains, taking just one or two examples. This video explains the whole situation from a micro angle also. So it's a good watch. Please go through it positively.
Representation of the way a market economy works, the circular flow diagram. To start with, you have three separate entities: households, firms, and the government. Firms sell goods and services to the households, and in return, the households pay them with money. That's called the goods market. However, the households get that money by providing the factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, to the firms. That's called the factor market. And the firms pay the households back in the form of wages. So you see, the money goes from the households to the firms in the form of payments for goods, and goes from the firms to the households in the form of wages. The government gets money from both groups in the form of taxes, income taxes, and sales taxes. However, the government gives that money back to the firms in the form of government purchases of services and goods, and gives it back to the households in the form of transfer payments, such as welfare, social security, or government subsidies. And there you have it, the circular flow diagram. Let's take an example. John is a farmer who grows wheat. He sells his wheat to a company that makes bread. With the money he earned from selling his wheat, John buys food to feed him and his family, including bread from the company he sold his wheat to. The company then can use the money gained from the sale of their bread to buy more wheat, and the cycle continues. The government imposes a sales tax on the bread that the bread company sells, and it imposes an income tax on the money that John made from selling his wheat. With that money, the government buys bread from the bread company in order to feed the army and government officials, and the government also needs more wheat, so it gives John a subsidy for wheat. Basically, it gives his money to grow wheat. Now, this is a simplified version of the way a market economy works, but the circular flow diagram is useful for showing in a neat way how the economy runs and sustains itself.
So I'm sure you people are confident enough now about the circular flow diagram and the circular flow model, and about the various concepts that we've talked about, okay, in this whole video, okay, about the market for goods and services, and also the market for factors of production, the government and how the government functions between these two groups of firms and households, the flow of money, the inflows and outflows of money, the factors of production, the way they're flowing from households to firms, and the goods and services flowing from the firms back to the households. Okay, it should make you confident enough. So this is where this part ends, and in the next video we're going to talk about how to organize economies and an overview of economic systems. By the end of that session, you should be able to contrast traditional economies, command economies, and market economies. In this last video part that you saw, that I brought in from the net, that I included out here, this narrator was talking about market economy. Okay, so that would be a part that would be a subtopic we'll be addressing in our next video. And after that, you'll also be able to explain gross domestic product, or GDP, which will be included in the next video. And you'd also be able to assess the importance and effects of globalization. So, and like I said, there would be some additional videos after this on various terms that I have used in this video, and I'll try to address them as well as possible. So it would take me a little more time to go into this, the next primary video of this series. That's 1.4, how to organize economies and an overview of economic systems, because in between I'm going to cover with some more videos on goods and production and growth and the other GDP and everything that I've talked about. So that would be an additional read for you people, or an additional video session, or video sessions, multiple video sessions for you. And by the time you've completed all of it, I should be able to come up with the next part of this chapter. Till my next video then, take care, God bless, and please subscribe, like, and share. Take care.